of Dundee City Council's Scrutiny Committee, which is being held remotely in terms of Section 43 of the Local Governance in Scotland Act 2003. All members in attendance are able to fully participate in the meeting, which is being recorded. Should any member need to leave the meeting for any reason, can they please use the chat to advise of this? If a member loses their connection, they should make every effort to rejoin the meeting, but if this is not possible, the Committee Services Officer will note their absence for the remainder of the meeting. If you have to leave the meeting due to a conflict of interest, you must remain out of the meeting until invited back in. Would all members please mute their microphones when not speaking to avoid background noise and turn off any smart speakers. Please start the meeting with your camera on. Your face will appear on the screen when you are speaking. If your connection is poor, you may wish to turn off your camera and see if this improves matters. If this doesn't help, you may wish to quickly leave the meeting and rejoin. If you wish to raise a point of order, ask a question, speak on any item, or move a motion or amendment, please use the chat when the relevant item is called. The convener will then invite you to speak. Would members of the press and public please not post messages in the chat? Where items are for noting, or where there has been no disagreement expressed, the convener will call for any member who has a contrary view to identify this through the meeting chat, otherwise the item will be agreed. Please would members not use the chat for any other purposes, as those joining the meeting by telephone cannot see the chat and therefore will not be able to follow the debate. Although we are operating in a different way, this is still a formal meeting of the committee, and the required standards of behaviour and discussion are the same as in a face-to-face meeting. Standing orders will apply to the proceedings, and the terms of the Councillors' Code of Conduct will also apply in the normal way. Does any member have any queries regarding this procedure? There are no queries, convener, so I'll now ask the Committee Services Officer to take a roll call for the minute. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. As indicated, I'll now take a roll call for the minute, and I would ask if members could confirm they are present when I call their names. Bailey Keenan.
Present.
Bailey Wright.
Present.
Bailey McPherson.
Good afternoon. Present.
Bailey Scott.
Here.
Thank you. Bailey Soares.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Deputy Lord Provost Cardell.
Present.
And I've received apologies from Councillor Ilonakla, and I believe that Councillor Lynn is kindly attending as her substitute. Is Councillor Lynn present?
I am, Willie, thanks.
Thank you very much. And finally, Councillor Short.
I'm here, thank you.
That concludes the roll call. Takes you on to item 1, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations from the membership to the agenda as it currently stands? Okay, there being no declarations, then it takes you on to item 2, summary of external care inspector inspection reports for local authority nurseries, May 2022 to March 2023. It's a report by Executive Director of Children and Family Service, and you're asked to give the recommendations.
Yes, is there any officer looking to say a few words on this report? It's an excellent report, but let you in to start with.
Okay, thank you very much, convener. Yeah, just it is an excellent report, and I'm delighted to hear you saying that, because we're very pleased with it in our service too. So you'll see it's that summary we bring annually, because we have quite a number of care inspectors in our nurseries over the years, so we tend to bring a summary report as outlined in the purpose there. So this represents 11 inspections across a mixture of some of our standalone nurseries and some nursery classes within our primary schools. So it's a combined report, and you can see from the results there and the summary of the evaluations in the main text in 4.0 that the vast majority of these evaluations were very good. And there's a couple of goods in there, and of course there's one outstanding excellence across the board. So overall, a very positive picture of the excellent provision that our early years team offer the youngest children in terms of the start, the very best start in their learning their learning journey through our education system in Dundee. So an excellent nursery, no requirements at all as a result of these inspections, and only one area for improvement, which was an outside area to be just improved around the environment, and that's already been overtaken. So so I'll stop there and see if there's any questions or comments. Thank you, Convener.
Billy McPherson, will bring you in first.
Thanks very much, Convener, and I concur with everything you've said, and indeed Mrs May has said. This is the sort of report that gladdens the heart, really, doesn't it? In the feedback from Care Inspectorate inspection reports across the board have been absolutely excellent. You'll recall on Monday night, Councillor Crichton and I brought a motion to the P&R Committee about the work of the Wave Trust in tackling adverse childhood experiences, and in writing our motion, which we're pleased that the committee endorsed, we did make the point about the very good work our early years service has undertaken in that whole area. And I think this summary of inspection reports really rather underlines that. I have one particular question. And that's really around the thoroughly excellent feedback in relation to Woodley Nursery. It's pretty rare. I think I've seen it before, but it's relatively rare that you see through 4 areas excellence throughout the board. And my question really is around there must be sharing of good practice, not just Woodley, but across the board. And I was just really wondering if Audrey or perhaps Leslie, I noticed Leslie's on the call today, and very grateful, Leslie, for the hard work you and your colleagues put in the early years sector. But I'd really be like some feedback on how good practice is, if you like, disseminated across the service, particularly where you get particularly excellent reports, as we particularly see in relation to Woodley Nursery.
Okay, thank you for the question, Billy McPherson, and you're right, Leslie, the manager of the service, I think would be best placed to answer your question. Thank you.
Okay, Leslie.
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you for your question, Billy McPherson. I think it's a really important question that you've raised, and it's something that we take really seriously, which is the concept of looking inwards in Dundee to find those areas of good practice and areas that we would want to develop, and to make sure that we also then look outwards. So we look outwards beyond the nurseries that each of our teams worked really hard in. So we do share the information in a number of ways, and I suppose it starts with, really importantly, attending the feedback that the Care Inspectorate give at the end of the inspections. So officers will be there, they will hear the finer details of the feedback that's been provided, which is then summarised in the reports. We collate all the themes in terms of what's working well and what's coming through as areas for development, and we share that round all our nurseries. And we also have the opportunity to share those themes when we do our regular quality improvement visits, and also during a number of professional network meetings that we have and through our training programme. And we also do really encourage our nursery leaders to visit each other so that they can talk about those finer details and can reflect in terms of their own self-evaluation. So yeah, you're absolutely right, looking inwards and also looking outwards, and never resting on our laurels, always looking to develop. So thank you for your question.
And thanks for your reply, Leslie. That was excellent, and I think I'm sure the whole committee would want you to send our thanks and good wishes to all the various nursery schools in this report, because I think it's really excellent all round. Thank you.
Indeed. Billy Scott.
I had a couple of questions, Convener, and the first one's been dealt with. It was to ask whether there's internal benchmarking goes on, given the full house of excellent grading that Woodley had received. But my other question is in relation to Dens Road Nursery on page 11 of the notes. Although it's written under Dens Road Nursery, I think it refers to the whole service, and it's about creating an infection prevention and control policy. I'd have thought, given the pandemic, there would be a well-thumbed policy in place already about infection prevention and control. So I just wondered what that's referring to, please, and what steps are being taken to respond to it.
Leslie, do you want to come in on that? It is just the nursery, so I'll let Leslie come in on that.
So yes, thank you for your question, and you're absolutely right. So there are bespoke nursery policies and procedures in place for infection prevention and control, accidents and incidents, first aid and medication procedures. And prior to this, the policies and procedures were generic DCC policies, but now every nursery will have their own bespoke infection control policy. So it wasn't really, it wasn't an area to improve, it was just a suggestion to keep thinking about that and keep developing that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Short.
Thank you, convener. First of all, just a wee comment that what strikes from the list is that this is across all of our socioeconomic areas that are covered within this report, and the fact that every single one of them is coming out with a brilliant feedback just gives us great warmth to know that, you know, the policy of 1,140 hours and the building of schools, and these are babies that presumably have had the opportunity to be given the baby box, and then this now nurturing at this very early start, and we're doing it in a very good way, is really, really positive. And my question is really around the fact that obviously these are our nurseries, and I just wanted to check in about the wider nursery provision across the city. Presumably when you have a good standard, that raises the standard within the other provisions across the city as well, or am I being too presumptuous and half glass full?
Yep, an officer looking to respond. Make a
Leslie,
comment.
Leslie, do you want to say a few words? Because you're quite right to remind us, Councillor Short, that we do carry out quality improvement support for the partner providers as well. So I'll let Leslie say more about that.
So when I explained about how we share all the findings and the learning, that absolutely applies to all nurseries and childminders, in fact, in Dundee, delivering the 1140 hours. In general terms, the funded providers who have been inspected are doing fine. You know, I would say generally good. We've not got anybody really sort of hitting the very good or excellence as of yet. But yeah, we provide quality improvement visits to all our nurseries in Dundee, and they are absolutely part of our CLPL programme. And yeah, it's about all Dundee's children accessing high quality. So we work really hard on that, Councillor Short.
Yeah, is this report agreed? Can I, as suggested by Billy McPherson, that you take back to the staff the appreciation of the committee and obviously report that we're normally quite a grumpy lot, and we're really pleased to see such an excellent report coming forward, and you know, we'd welcome that everywhere else within our school estate. So, but well done to those involved. Thanks. Wally, we'll move on.
Okay, thank you. Item 3 then before his internal audit reports, the report by the Chief Internal Auditor, Cathy Wiley.
Yeah, you want to lead me through some of these, Kath? I think there's just a couple that on it, isn't it?
Yeah, this is the summary of the reports that have been finalised since the last time we reported to the committee, and we've got a follow-up on project management, one on Tayside contracts and one on fire risk assessments. So on page 17 we have the follow-up of the review of project management, and this was looking at the implementation of actions from a previous report which had actions around standardising project management methodologies, looking at skills analysis at the initiation phases of projects, and also having more consistent governance arrangements during the project lifespan. And those 3 recommendations, 1 was critical, 2 were significant, and these have been implemented. And so the overall conclusion is that the actions taken by management have addressed the control weaknesses that were highlighted in the original review, and that is full assurance now in that area. The next item is Teesside contracts.
Cathy, if I can just hold you there and we'll maybe step through them one at a time.
Okay,
because I
fine.
noticed that Billy McPherson's looking to come in and ask a question.
Okay.
Billy McPherson.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I'd hope would happen, convener. Grumpy lot, we're not a grumpy lot, convener, we're a very jolly lot. But anyway, leaving that aside.
Maybe it's just me.
No, surely, I find that hard to believe. But anyway, to the point. In relation to the project management, I was just really wondering if Cathy could give a little bit more information. I was a little bit concerned, if I'm being honest, to read that there was no sort of standard project management methodology used. And I would have thought that should be the case. And just for consistency across different projects, I would have thought. And I was just really wondering, I know the conclusion is that the actions have been undertaken, but I was just really wondering if internal audit is now satisfied that there is if you like, a proper standard project management methodology now being implemented, if you like, across the board.
Yes, that's something that I wasn't personally involved in this audit in particular, but I know that we would have looked at what was in place, and if it hadn't have been up to the standard of what we would expect for that action, we would not have allowed it to be signed off as complete.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm just really wondering, maybe the chief executive or another officer, chief officer, might be able to give an indication of if you like, an overview of their understanding of project management methodology across departments as it currently stands.
Okay, chief exec.
Thanks, convener, and thanks, Billy McPherson. So the original internal audit report did note that there wasn't a consistent approach, and what actions have been followed up is dedicated space for all staff to access and follow in one type of methodology. There are various layers of training or development associated with that, depending on the type of project that you would be looking to manage. And that goes from an awareness to an intermediate to almost that full-blown project management development. So the work that's being done standardises that approach and makes it available to all council services to follow, whether or not they're doing a small redesign of a particular service or whether we're looking at a large project to manage within the council.
That's very helpful, Greg. Thanks very much.
Yeah, Councillor Short. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, Kevin. Mine was to come in during the Teesside contract section. Okay. Once we get to it. Thank you.
No problem. Can I just ask about the sort of standardisation of the project management, and ask whether there is a sort of software package that people are using that would sort of mark the milestones, and that if anyone from project management was looking at it, they'd understand what where and any project was sitting, given that it would be following a fairly standard format of process, and indeed knowing that quality assurance would be there at the right time, given that we've had the roofs issue that that may well have been lacking.
Convener, I'll maybe coming on that question, and I think it's something that we could follow up. So depending on the type of project that we're managing, and it relates back to my previous response to Bailey McPherson, will depend on the level of software that we'll use. So for some projects that are at scale, there'll be almost those Gantt charts which will map out exactly what needs to be done and when, and will be tracked. For smaller scaled projects, what we might use is Excel spreadsheets to monitor progress, which are now being deployed on team sites, so that everyone within that project can have access to the same information and there's one master document. So we are looking at the project management support that's available, which closes off this internal audit action, and we'll look to strengthen that throughout different pieces of work within the council.
Okay, thank you for that then. There's no other questions on this report, so this report agreed? Seems yes, so we'll move on then, Cathy.
So the next one that we're looking at is the Teesside contracts one.
Yeah.
where we were undertaking a high-level review of the governance arrangements that were in place to manage and monitor the council's partnership and with Tayside contracts, and the overall conclusion that there was basically a sound system of control, but there were some areas where it was viewed that improvements could be made. And again, this is a reduced assurance overall assessment. The main areas where there were actions agreed around this were in terms of improving the financial and operational performance monitoring process for the arrangements with Tayside contracts, and also around a clear reporting process being put in place around that, and also that the council should perform a best value assessment of the overall service provided by Tayside contracts. And I'll stop there before I go on to fire risk assessments for questions.
Okay, looks like then we'll bring in Councillor Sharp to start with.
Okay, thank you. I'm on the board of Tayside Contracts, and a week past Monday, there was quite a robust meeting, I shall call it, around the overall scrutiny and layers of questioning when it comes to Tayside Contracts, best value, etc. So, Cathy, can you tell me, are we alone in pulling together this kind of report? And is it possible within the realms of this committee to share your findings or our findings with the other members of the Board of Tayside Contracts, so that they understand that it would be almost like tripling the offering to have another kind of audit security system in the Contracts Board as well?
So I think we shouldn't be alone in having monitoring in place within the council to look at whether or not this or any other large-scale operation is delivering what was agreed within the specifications and what have you that have been put in place for the services that they're delivering for us. I'm not aware of anything being shared specifically from other organisations in the way that you're describing, but I don't see why that couldn't be further discussed as part of the development of the reporting that would be being undertaken. Some of this reporting would sit at management level, and some of it would sit more at the sort of scrutiny or other committee level. But there may be other people who might have some opinion on that might want to come in on this one.
Or maybe not.
Looking like you're on your own.
Okay.
Perhaps it's something that could be taken off table, just so that we're not in a situation where we have the same information being copied lots and lots of times. It just seems kind of a little bit officer heavy to spend their time bringing in reports when reports are already there, if that makes sense.
I suppose the report coming to the Scrutiny Committee is giving Dundee City councillors a wider view of the concerns that may exist or checking the good governance. But I suppose for our point of view, then I suppose the individuals that would be best placed to scrutinise this are people like yourself that are actually on the board. And I suppose I would be asking the Chief Executives, how is this shared, and how do our Dundee councillors get the opportunity to question this in more depth with a greater understanding of the workings of Tayside Contracts than like myself that's never been on their board. So perhaps, Greg, you could make a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. So I think that the matter that Councillor Short raised around sharing the information is something that we can explore so that the other councils can potentially learn from us. But I think the point that Cathy's making is about how Dundee City Council assures itself that the services that are being provided for a certain fee from Tayside Contracts are delivering best value. And that might be slightly different or in addition to what members of Tayside Contracts Joint Committee may want to assure themselves with. But I think looking at how we can share information that we've learned through this review with Tayside Contracts and the other councils is something that I'm happy to explore. But I am really keen, Convener, like you said, to look at how we bring reports back from our related bodies to scrutiny to ensure that we are demonstrating best value and the level of service is being provided that we would expect.
I mean, this one's saying that basically there's a sound system, but I'm wondering whether in some areas that there wasn't, how we would best share that with members of a joint board, in particular the Dundee councillors that are members of that joint board, because, you know, the people at the sharp end should be looking after our best interests at the board meetings that they're at. So how do we share, you know, these type of things with them? So perhaps that's something that we could, you could take forward or look to take forward. See, given that the nod. Okay, we'll move on then. We'll bring Bailey McPherson in.
Thanks indeed, Convener. My question's really around the fact that the council was not, and obviously is now, completing a best value assessment, which I think is actually necessary. The council has a big stake in Tayside contracts, but it also has a stake, if you like, in other bodies. Valuation Joint Board immediately springs to mind. Tay Road Bridge Joint Board is another, where we have a significant stake, if you like, but also council departments in terms of best value assessments. And I was just really wondering, or really seeking reassurance, that the fact that the council had not been completing a best value assessment in the case of Tayside contracts isn't replicated elsewhere. Do we ensure that we are properly ensuring that best value assessments do take place across, not just across departments, but also amongst other, if you like, joint operations we may have with other local authorities, as I say, such as Valuation, Taybridge Joint Board, etc.
Someone able to give Bailey McPherson a response on that?
Thanks, Convener. I'll maybe come in. So, Bailey McPherson, thanks for the question. Obviously, from a council perspective, we were subject to a best value review by Audit Scotland, and that subsequently formed part of the annual audit. In terms of the separate bodies, I think it's a point that's well made by Chief Internal Auditor.
Somebody switch their mic off. Thanks.
Thanks. I think it's a point well made by the Chief Internal Auditor, and I know that Rob Emmett is looking to ensure that we do carry out those best value reviews at an appropriate time with all those bodies and agencies that we are connected with, so that we can provide assurance back to Scrutiny Committee. But I'm not aware those have been done to date, Bailey McPherson, but I can see, Convener, that Robert's looking to come in. So if you're agreeable, it might be helpful to hear from Robert.
Yeah, thank you. Robert.
Thank you, Convener. So I was just to add to what Chief Executive said, there's obviously a level of scrutiny that happens at the board of these joint bodies and of ourselves as the I'm trying to think what the correct word is, what the parent is. And we both have a duty, as I understand it, to make sure that we are demonstrating the best value. This is probably the first audit of one of these that we've come across while I'm in role, so I'm quite happy to take that away and have a look at making sure that we can demonstrate to the committee that we are covering it. In terms of the points, the Tayside contracts is obviously a much more extensive business that with a much higher turnover, in my terms, of activity, whereas the work of the Road Bridge and the Valuation Board are much more focused on their particular duties. But I think it's something that we can perhaps bring back to the committee just to provide that reassurance.
That's very helpful. I take the point completely that Tayside contracts is a large operation and a very significant turnover, and perhaps the other two that I alluded to are less so in that respect, although obviously undertaking very important work. But the bottom line on it is that if there's a requirement, and it's good practice to have these, assessments, and obviously where we have as a council have a stake in the operation of these bodies, that we are undertaking that. So I think what Mr. Emmett suggests is very sensible, and I'm grateful for his reply.
Yeah, thanks for that. See, if we've proved that an organisation or the part of that organisation delivers best value, it might be a good sales pitch for Tayside contracts to be using it with other councils that are now engaging with that particular service, given that obviously the more that Tayside contracts makes and the more efficient it becomes, then the chances are it makes all round a better efficiency for council, given that I'm sure school meals and things like that aren't necessarily taken up by all three authorities, are there? So is there a mechanism to sort of use, we demonstrate there's best value because we've audited it, why aren't you using the service? Greg?
Yeah, thanks, convener. So I think mostly all of the services, not all of them, but certainly from a school meal perspective and a cleaning perspective, are used by the partnering councils, so Dundee, Angus and Perth. I think the point that you've made regarding the provision of school meals through the facility that all three councils are funding is something that Tayside Contracts are actively looking at exploring as to whether or not that service could be sold so that it would generate an income back to the three partner councils. So from a business development perspective, I know that Tayside Contracts are looking at that along with a number of other areas. And again, you're absolutely right, having that base value review would, I think, enhance that potential offering to other councils and indeed other public sector and other agencies within the area and beyond. So it's something that I know Tayside Contracts are looking to progress.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Okay, and Billy Scott.
Yeah, I just wondered if there hasn't been best value assessments being carried out or benchmarking of core operational costs to ensure that council's costs incurred are reasonable. What does the council currently do to make sure and assure itself that it is getting best value and the costs incurred are reasonable?
Is anyone able to make a comment on that? Andrea?
So currently we have a lot of cost data that we get through benchmarking. So the local government benchmarking gives us a lot of cost data. So we do use that regularly across the areas that covers. And obviously within other areas, services would be looking at any contracts they have in place to make sure they're getting good value, particularly if they're not subcontracting, but using the third sector to fulfil some of their services.
Yeah, Billy Scott?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Billy Wright?
Yeah, thank you. Could I first of all thank Cathy and our officers actually for the help and support that you've given me, because I've never actually been on this committee before, and I found it very helpful and very useful, the paperwork that you sent me. So thank you, Cathy, for that. I really appreciated it. When we're talking about best value, I think we sometimes cringe away for best value because I think it usually means that our services are slightly more expensive than the other sectors. And I actually today, the reason I'm bringing this up today, actually got a complaint from a member of the public about the amount of money that was actually being spent in and around the grounds at Clippington Road at the depot. No, there's no doubt in my mind it's definitely an improvement that's been made. But I've asked the person to put it in writing, so that will be coming. So I'm just wondering how long will it take to do a best value review?
Helen, I think the money that's getting spent might be at Dundee Contracts Depot and no Tayside Contracts Depot. So maybe something you've got to take at another meeting.
Yeah.
Or to be the chief executive and ask the question.
Yeah, well, I'll maybe ask the chief executive that question elsewhere. But I think it's something that people perceive as being Tayside Contracts.
Yeah. So I think we'll take it off the meeting and talk to the chief executive about that separately. It'd be useful. Thanks.
Will do.
Okay, seeing as there's no other questions, this report agreed. Thank you. Okay, Cathy, we'll move on to the next one.
So the final one is around fire risk assessment. Sorry, just bear with me. I pressed my mouse and it took it to another page. So the fire risk assessments are looked after by two separate sections within the council. The neighbourhood services look after the properties that are within the housing revenue account, and city development looks after the others. So the review was to look at the arrangements that were in place to make sure that the council was managing and monitoring delivery of the fire risk assessments in line with relevant legislation. The overall conclusion that we got was that there was basically a sound system of control, but there were some areas where it was viewed that improvements could be made, and the key items where we've agreed recommendations are around, in terms of the city development, they have a fire risk assessment spreadsheet, and we've recommended that that should just be reviewed to make sure that it's fully up to date and that all relevant properties are included and any that don't need to be there are archived, and also that there is a mechanism put in place to keep that up to date going forward. In terms of what's happening within neighbourhood services, the main recommendation there was around allocating responsibility for the fire risk assessments to one individual or team. But there was also commentary there made in terms of considering whether or not the two could be brought together. That's all I really need to draw attention to on this one.
Okay. I take it with the two of them brought together is just about sharing the workload, and somebody for city development having a look at neighbourhood resources, which might give a fresh pair of eyes and a different outlook on the risk assessment. Was that the suggestion, is it?
Yeah, it was just an idea that might make things a bit easier, but it's obviously for the services themselves to decide whether that actually would make life easier or whether it's better to keep it separate.
Yeah. Louise, see you're looking to come in, make a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Bailey Keenan. It was just on the back of Cathy. It's really about betterment and consistency, and that's what we're looking at around shared resources. As you say, having that shared resource and the efficiencies that come with that. So that's something that myself, the head of city development, design and property, and the senior manager within health and safety are now reviewing.
Okay, thanks for that then. Is there any other questions on this report? Okay, is the report agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, Willie, we'll move on to the next report.
Okay, takes on to item 5, Internal Audit Plan Update and Progress Report. Again, it's a report by Cathy Wiley, Chief Internal Auditor.
Over to you again then, Cathy, for a change.
Thank you. This report is just the normal progress report with the 22-23 plan plus the items that were brought forward from 21-22, and also a summary around the open items that are still awaiting completion in terms of recommendations that have been agreed. And you'll see, starting on page 25 is the table that shows you all of the items that were in the plan or brought forward from the previous year and what stage each audit is at, and that includes information about the items that were taken out of the plan during the year. I'm not intending to say too much about that because we've looked at the specifics of some in the previous item, and we'll talk a bit more about the overall position in the next item, which is the annual report. I just wanted really to draw attention on page 33 to the information around the outstanding actions that we have. So there are 41 open actions at the moment in comparison to 45 that were there the last time we reported this to you. That movement of 4 is an addition of 2 and a closure of 6 actions. One of the actions that was closed was a critical action from 21-22. So that's good progress in terms of moving forward with closing down some of the older actions and getting things moving. The other thing that's good to see is that previously we had a high number of actions which had passed their agreed delivery date, but new delivery dates had not been agreed. We're now in the position that the vast majority of those items that needed to have their dates revised, these dates have now been revised, which means people have got a target that they're working to now to get these actions completed.
Okay,
and
thanks very much.
That's all I've got to say on this.
Thank you very much for that. Is there any questions for Cathy on this report? Is this report agreed? Okay, thank you. Willie, we'll move on to the next one.
Okay, thanks. Takes on to item 5, Internal Audit Annual Report. Again, report by Cathy Wiley, Chief Internal Auditor.
Okay, go for it again now, Cathy.
Thank you. This is the annual report, which is required by the public sector internal audit standards, and it's for me in terms of providing you with an opinion. And also there's a range of other information that the standards require that I bring to your attention at this time in the annual report. So I won't draw your attention to everything that they ask me to report to you. It is all included in the report, but there's a few things just to draw to your attention. Starting on page 39 is my overall opinion, which at 2.1, my opinion is that reasonable assurance can be placed upon the adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's framework of governance, risk management and control for the year to 31st March 2023. And at the bottom of that page, you'll see that there were no limitations of scope placed on the audit work by management during 22-23. The next thing I want just to speak briefly about is the structure and resources within the team. That's on page 41 is the detail from that. This has been discussed at a number of meetings throughout the year, but you'll be aware that the principal auditor has been acting up into the senior manager's role for the whole of this year, and that I came in October 2022 through an arrangement with Angus Council to take on the responsibilities of the Chief Internal Auditor from October 2022. That arrangement will be reviewed shortly because it was in place for a year, and we will come back just shortly to let you know what's happening for the period after that. The other things during the year in terms of the team, there was a new post of senior auditor which was created and filled in October. The co-sourcing contract that we've had in place for a number of years finished last year, and we didn't renew that for this year whilst we reviewed what was actually required, but we've now got permission from PNR to go out and advertise for a joint procurement exercise with Angus Council for primarily IT audit input going forward. And there also have been a number of changes within the auditor posts within the year. We do currently have a vacancy which we're in the process of organising recruiting for. Although it has had an impact, which I'll come on to talk about in terms of the amount of work that we've completed in the year, it hasn't had an impact on my ability to provide my opinion at this point, and I don't have any issues with where we are with that. Obviously, we just need to make sure we get that post filled going forward. Sorry. So in terms of the activity during the year, you'll see there at 5.4, we've talked about the plan being revised to take account of the resource position. There were a number of areas that we took forward into the 23-24 plan. We didn't take everything forward, and that was a mixture of items where other assurance was available, but also when we did the risk assessment, when we produced the new plan, there were some other things that we thought were more risky, and therefore they've been put in. These things that we haven't taken forward will be thought about again in future and may well appear in future plans at some stage. The other thing really at 5.7 was just to, which is on page 43, is just to draw attention to the fact that we've changed the way that we're following up on internal audit actions. When we're agreeing actions with services now, we are actually agreeing with them what the evidence will be that will show that that action has been completed, and that makes things a bit clearer for services. And we're at the point where a service closes an action in Pentana, the audit team are looking at that point to make sure that we're comfortable that that is actually cleared and complete, and that the evidence provided is what was anticipated. And we just think it's a bit more efficient to do it that way rather than do the huge piece of work that was done previously. And so you won't be seeing the report in September that you used to see that was a large progressive view of everything, because we're doing it on an ongoing basis. In terms of the plan achievement, there's a summary in the two appendices, which are page 49 and page 51. Page 49 has the summary of all of the items that have been completed in the year, and you can see from that that most of the pieces of work that have been complete have either had a full or reduced assurance. There are only 3 items which didn't have that level of assurance attached to them, and I'll come back to them in a minute. And you'll see from the Appendix B at page 51, all of the items that we haven't managed to complete yet this year, the majority of them are either at the point where they've got a draft report produced or they're in the fieldworks complete and is currently being reviewed. And there are a few that are still in progress or where planning is just undertaken, but we're obviously working to get those pieces of work finished as quickly as we can. Just to come back onto page 44 to the areas that were not fully assessed as being full or reduced assurance. At 6.5, you can see that we've got the 3 of them summarised there. Governance procurement cards were limited assurance, but at the beginning of June, there was only 1 agreed action that was not fully complete, and that was assessed by management as being 75% complete. In terms of school fund income, which was a no assurance report, you'll recall there were a number of actions there. There are only 2 routine recommendations that are still in progress, and they're assessed as being 80% complete. And in terms of the interment fees, which were no assurance, all of the actions there have been completed. There was only 1 critical action from a previous year that remained outstanding, and that was from 2021 and relates to subcontractors, and that's estimated at 90% complete, with 2 pieces of work that are due to be completed within this current month, and then that action will be 100% complete. So we've talked a couple of times during this presentation about the fact that we haven't managed to get through all of the plan and some of the delays we've had. At 6.8, we've talked about the main reasons why we've had a bit of delay in completing some of the work. Obviously, the resources have had an impact on that. We do find that we're having difficulty sometimes with services in just the time it takes to get agreement for things at different stages. That can be at the agreeing the brief, it can be getting the information to allow the field work. But we particularly find that we'll have an issue sometimes in just getting the draft reports finalised, and we're looking at ways at the moment to see how we might be able to improve that process so that that can be done a bit more smoothly. There was also time taken out of the planned work to address some of the items that were in our own action plan. Some of these had been sitting for a bit of time, and we also added a few new ones this year, but I think all of the things that we've done have been worth taking the time out of producing audits to allow us to just make our processes a bit smoother and to make them run more efficiently, and to make the reporting that we bring to you and to the services a bit more meaningful. We also had an additional assignment that was added during the year, and we've had 4 areas that we've had to work on this year, which are things that don't come up very often. Every 4 or 5 years, it just so happens they've all landed together, and that's taken up quite a bit of my own time and the principal auditor's time. And there's been a small impact in terms of the fact that the insurance line management for insurance has come into the service during this year. I'm not proposing to say anything more about the discharge of audit recommendations because we've covered that already today. So page 46 has got my thoughts and conclusions around governance and risk management, which are the other 2 areas that I have to provide my opinion on over and above the internal controls. And at 8.2, you can see that my conclusion on governance was that the local code of governance is reviewed annually and aligns with good practice. And although the signing off each year by executive directors identifies some areas for improvement, which are reflected in your governance statement, none of these are fundamental in terms of making the overall governance arrangements inadequate. And in terms of risk management, the risk management oversight by officers is well developed, although corporate risks are only reported to elected members once per year. And the current review of the risk management policy and strategy is slightly overdue, but that is well advanced and is due to be reported in August this year. And the final bit is the performance indicators around the service. The key one really is compliance with public sector internal audit standards, which, as I've already explained, we are non-conformant in that we haven't had an external review in 5 years, but the other work that we've done to review against the standards confirms that we are compliant with them. We also have a couple of other internal feedback and indicators, and they're all showing positive results. And we haven't had any observations from external audit either. So I know that's been a big lot of information all in one go, but hopefully that's been useful, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I see Bailey McPherson's ready to go.
Thanks
Bailey
indeed,
McPherson.
Convener, and very grateful to Cathy for a very comprehensive overview. And it was really around the area of resource that I really had a question. I'm not sure if it's so much for yourself as maybe more for the Chief Executive, for Mr. Emmett. And that's really about, I appreciate that in relation to getting through the internal audit plan, which is pretty extensive, I think we would all agree. There are other factors other than the number of staff, within the internal audit team. And but nonetheless, it's really around that area I really had a question. It's good that the vacancy is being filled. That's obviously helpful. My question really is, and I know we'll get a final position by October in relation to this sort of sharing arrangement with our neighbouring authority in relation to the Chief Internal Audit role. I think we've all been very grateful for the input you've given, Cathy. I suppose my question for Chief Officers is, how sustainable a position is it to, in the long term, share your Chief Internal Audit role with another authority and effectively get a couple of days a week is what is the current position? And I'm just really wondering if that aspect is being reviewed, notwithstanding the fact that I think Cathy's done an absolutely excellent job in the period that obviously she's been undertaking that role.
That bit's agreed. Right, okay. Robert or Greg, what's going first?
I think I'll go first, Convener.
Okay.
Just to say, officers will consider the position Bailey McPherson regarding the Chief Internal Auditor post and will report back in the normal way. I guess one of my observations was, I think the work that has been delivered, as you know, has been of a high quality. And prior to entering the joint arrangement, like a number of other councils in Scotland, there are a number of key areas which we've noted, I think, at committee, where we are struggling to recruit. So it's not a particular issue for Dundee in isolation, it's across local authority. So in some cases, my view at the moment would be that partnering will be a way that we will have to deal with that, because what we are not seeing when we're advertising posts is a huge number of people, and particularly of sufficient quality, who are coming forward. So from my perspective, I think we will see greater partnering and sharing going forward. But of course, what that can't do is compromise the role, particularly given the function that the Chief Internal Auditor carries out. So I don't know, Bailey Keenan, if Robert has anything further to add, but if you're agreeable, I'll maybe ask Robert to come in.
Okay, Robert. You're on mute, Robert.
Thank you, Convener. Not the fastest finger this afternoon. Just to add to that, we're very cited on the resourcing and making sure there's sufficient resources to carry out the work. So Greg and Cathy and I met just recently to look at how we make sure that there's sufficient capacity within Cathy's team to deliver the programme for next year. So there's a piece of work going on to procure some external support, particularly in specialist areas, but with the opportunity to bolster that. And as Cathy said, we've looked at the vacant posts. So it's important that the resources are there. And it's also important, I think, as Cathy highlighted in her presentation, that officers work with her to complete the work and make sure that the audits are finished in a timely fashion. So we're very much alive to the concerns that you've raised.
Okay, I'm very grateful for that. We're quite clearly going to have to just clone Cathy. That's clearly the answer. But no, I'm very grateful for the feedback, and obviously we'll get further further feedback on the position post October 2023, obviously in due course. So grateful for the responses.
Yeah, Cathy, I also think you've done marvellous for you got here as well. So I'm sure that myself and Fraser and others on the committee, you'd much rather stay with us than be back in Angus full time. But I'll leave that choice to you. I'll put you right on the spot. The question I would like to ask is, you're saying that there's some subcontract that are part of the audit that still needs to be completed. And, I dare say that's relatively small, but, I've had concerns recently about subcontractors, because the subcontractor stands the chance of making the same gaffe as we made with roofs, or council made with roofs. And I know that there is some work that we've subcontracted that is needing repaired, and wonder whether that subcontractor, I hope they've got the backbone to make that repair. I don't know when it's going to happen. But likewise, we subcontracted house building and that particular site's went on the best part of 7 years. So whilst we entered into an agreement with a company that we knew were sound, how do we monitor their ability to still have the backbone 7 years down the line that, you know, that they're still an organisation that we should have been finishing off a contract with, and that when they finish it off, they're able to make good any snagging or, you know, building repairs that should be substandard if there is. And if that's an area that we need to consider for audit, because I think that in some cases where it's substantial amounts of money, the council run a risk that at least as councillors we should be aware of, and audit would be perhaps the best area to be reviewing that.
Yeah, thank you. That in terms of how subcontractors are performing, that's obviously part of the contract management that should be undertaken just as part of the routine monitoring that goes on after a contract has been let. I know that we have it in the audit universe. I have a feeling that we have it in next year's plan, but I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I can't remember if it is in the plan. But I think we did put it into next year's plan because there had been some changes to how that monitoring was being undertaken, and we wanted to give a time for that to actually bed in before we reviewed it. I think that's where we are. But if that's not correct, I'll come back and tell you that later.
Okay, I throw it in for food for thought anyway, so if you're kind of on the case and you want to talk about that any further, feel free.
Okay.
You know, phone call away as it were, but seems to be no other questions on this report, so is this report agreed? Thank you. We'll move on then, Blake.
Okay, thanks. Takes you on to item 6, annual governance statement to 31st of March, the report by the Executive Director of Corporate Services.
Yeah, so is it yourself then, Robert? You're maybe still on mute if it is yourself.
That's Paul, I think. Apologies, convener. Paul will speak to that one.
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, convener. Apologies, we're having some technical issues this afternoon. Yeah, this item is a review of the annual governance statement for the past year, which we're required to bring to committee. Seek your approval for inclusion in the accounts. It details that review over the past year and identifies any areas in terms of improvements moving forward, together with look over and reviewing those items that were identified last year and required to be carried forward.
Is there any questions for Paul on the governance statement? Would appear not then. Is this report agreed?
Convener.
Yeah. Sorry, Billy.
Sorry. I'm not quite sure how appropriate this question is under this item, but I think I'll ask it anyway. And it's really about the revenue at Dundee House. The revenue usually comes into Dundee House. Just curious, really, about what has happened. Has it affected payments that are usually paid into Dundee House? Because I have heard of people turning up at Dundee House to make payments, even although it has been in the paper, and they've not been able to do it, and they're sort of were very unhappy about it. So I'm just wondering, overall, has that had an effect? I mean, some old people don't like to go online. They don't have credit cards or debit cards, and they much prefer to go with their money in their hand to pay their bills. So has revenue been affected in this case?
Yeah. Robert, are you looking to answer?
Thank you, convener. So first of all, the oops, bit of an echo there, sorry. The council tax collection was up for last year. So that doesn't suggest that that's the case, but I'll let Jackie come in, who'll know more about the detail.
Okay, then, Jackie.
Sorry, yeah, thank you, and thanks for the question. Yeah, we closed the cashier service in Dundee House back in April 2020. I think it was, might even have been 2021, and since that year, council tax collection has increased year on year since then. So although we don't have the cashiers in Dundee House, people still can make payment at any PayPal, any shops where there's PayPal, and as Robert mentioned, online or via the telephone. So in answer to your question, it hasn't really affected the revenue, and certainly for council tax collection.
Billy Wright, you're on mute there.
I was just saying thanks very much for that. I was just curious because there have been a lot of complaints recently about not being able to get into Dundee House for appointments. You know, they don't seem to feel that they've been listening to because the place is closed. But I dare say maybe there's appointments being made elsewhere.
Yes, I suppose I hear complaints about it myself, so I suppose someone will need to keep a monitor on and see whether there needs to be a change. So, okay, is this Robert? You're looking to say something there?
Just briefly, convener, if people have got concerns, it'd be helpful if they can pass them on to myself or Jackie. We've certainly haven't heard a lot, and it would be useful if there is feedback from citizens, if that is passed on to us, so we can have a look at it.
Yeah, that'd be so.
Well, I certainly can do that because I've had quite a few recently.
Billy McPherson, you looking to come in?
Don't particularly want to prolong this because I do realise it's slightly nebulous in relation to the report before us, but I would say anecdotally I've had the same, although it's been largely more related to actually not so much payments, but more towards actually wanting to speak to a member of staff. And again, anecdotally, difficulties getting through to departments on the phone. And I know that you can get you can make a pre-arranged meeting in the city square, but to the public, it seems like you're jumping through hoops to be able to do so. I personally think that some form of Just Ask facility, I say that because the District Council had such a thing many years ago, Just Ask, show up in these days it was in the Central Library, and it allowed people to come in and frankly just ask a question about public services. I think that sort of thing, council services rather, I think that sort of thing is really good practice. You're right, Bailey, right, not everybody wants to do it online. Many people do, but not everyone, and I do think we should be seen to be approachable. And you know, the perception for the public is that the council's becoming more remote, and I think that's something that we should really seek to avoid. But just a comment, thanks, convener.
Yeah, well, that. So I suppose if the complaints flood in, we'll be getting the report saying we changed it because we'll listen to people. So we'll look forward to that happening. If this item's agreed, then shall we move on to the next one?
Okay, thanks. Convener, item 7 then before you, the unaudited annual accounts.
I think before asking an officer to make any comment, I'd obviously like to thank officers for getting these ready. I know it's a struggle year on year, and as much as we'd like to see them at a conveners meeting for a bit of heads up at scrutiny, I realise the work that goes into putting these accounts together. So again, I'd obviously like to thank you for your efforts. Cheers. And look at it, if there's an officer wanting to make any comment about them to start with, and then we'll open up for questions.
If I may, convener.
Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, so these are obviously the accounts for last year, which have been completed as you've highlighted in terms of the statutory in time for the statutory deadline. They'll now be submitted following your approval this afternoon. Don't want to presume that, I suppose, to Audit Scotland for audit, and they will report back to us at the end of October on their view on the accounts, together with any changes. So obviously a lot of work has gone into getting to this point, and we'll be happy to take any questions that members may have. We have scheduled the 1st of September as a date for a seminar for members to ask any further questions or to go into any details they wish on the accounts.
Okay, that's going to be useful because others should be having a serious look at these as well as us. Billy McPherson.
Thanks indeed, and I echo your comments, Convener, in relation to, I think we're all aware of the huge workload and commitment given by the staff to put together what is a very extensive piece of work. And I would also comment in a positive sense that the narrative and the presentation, the narrative's well written and the presentation's very good as well. It's, you know, for those of us who are not accountants, it's actually, you know, the narrative's easy to follow, which I think is to the credit of all involved. I have a question. It may be so left field that you may want to come back to me because I don't expect you can answer every line of the whole thing. But on page, says he failing miserably to tell you, but page 89 of the substantive page number 75 of the actual report, there is it goes through general fund balances, transfers in and out. And I noticed that the transfers into car parking balances is actually greater than the whole balance that was held in the car parking account on the 1st of April 22. I was quite surprised. It was, frankly, significantly in excess of the original balance. Now, I appreciate that income into the car parking account dipped considerably during the COVID period, but I was just really wondering, is the 216,000 transfer in above what you would normally expect in one financial year?
Yeah, Francois is here with me.
Okay. Francois, are you able to answer that?
Yes, I'll try. Obviously, happy to share workings. The balance movement obviously relates to on-street car parking only, and it's taken from the transactions as per our general ledger. So obviously it's not the same every year. Some years higher than others. In this particular year, that was the movement that we saw. I'm obviously happy to share workings if required.
Okay, thanks for that, Francois. What I would say is, what I wouldn't mind by way of a follow-up is just really, and I'm not talking about something particularly extensive, but just an indication as to, you know, basically what transfers were in maybe the previous 2 or 3 years, maybe more than 2 actually when I think about it, because I suspect that the immediate 2 previous financial years will have been impacted by the pandemic, but maybe, you know, 2018 onwards sort of thing, and that way we can get an impression as to whether or not the transfer in 22-23 was greater than normal. So I'm grateful for Francois' response. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Can I maybe ask a few questions? It's really, I suppose, just proving that I've had a wee look at it and read it. The first item in relation is page 86, and it's events after the reporting period. Can somebody sort of break that down into layman's terms for me to have a bit of an understanding of what that actually means? There seems to be, you know, life expectancy increase decrease by 1 year, and there's a considerable amount of change, and you know, what's the effect on the balances or on our accounts with that?
Very convenient. Which page is that? Page 86 of the accounts.
The document. It's page 86 of the accounts. It's page 100 of the document. Sorry, Paul, you're on mute.
Apologies, convener again. So just to say that the accounts required to be made on a statutory basis rather than a cash basis, and that statutory basis includes accounting for pensions in line with IAS 19, and really what IAS 19 tries to achieve is accounting for the costs of pensions over the period that they're earned as opposed to the period that they're paid. And in doing so, we're required to take advice from our actuaries to calculate what the actuarial cost of pensions are, and they're dependent on a number of factors that are outlined in the accounts, including inflation, discount rates, future salary increases, longevity in terms of life expectancy, and a whole host of items. But essentially these adjustments that are made to the accounts are reversed out, so that the accounts that you see in terms of any cash impact are on a funding basis, which reflects purely the cost of pensions that we pay as employers. As I say, these costs on an actuarial basis have to be measured, a very complicated calculation that the actuaries do on our behalf, but essentially in terms of the accounts, to get it back to the funding position, we have to reverse all these adjustments out. So hopefully that some way goes to explain it. Happy to pick up on any other specific points at the briefing, if that would help.
Yeah, maybe it would do, because we want to sort of know as to whether we've paid any extra money or received any from them in relation to, you know, what we paying, 17% or 18% on employer contribution. Does it have an effect on what we've paid, or is it a sort of global figure that they've adjusted? No,
so thank you. There's no change between the two financial years in terms of the overall percentage that we've had to pay in terms of pension contributions. That's remained static at 17%. The actuarial valuation in terms of what all employers pay into Tayside Fund is reviewed on a 3-year basis. That review is due to be undertaken at March 2023. We will know the outcome of that review later this year, possibly in October. So any movements in terms of the overall pension contributions reflected in the accounts will be as a result of movements in the base, i.e. in terms of the salary costs, as opposed to any percentage of pension contributions. So any adjustments that you see in the accounts, either in the revenue account itself or the balance sheet, all reflect the adjustments in these different assumptions that the actuary has to take to calculate the accounts on a statutory basis.
Yeah, okay. The other question being in relation to page 89, obviously that's headed up as assets held for sale, or, you know, suggests that we're a 60% shareholder in Derrill. Is that's the case, is it? Or is this it?
So,
and are we doing everything we can to maximise income for that?
So two things on that, I suppose. Convener, firstly, yes, we're a 60% shareholder of the asset in accounting terms, and the balance is held by Angus Council. And as you'll have seen in terms of the revenue generated through the scheme in the past year that was reported through the revenue monitoring, actually we've done relatively well from the waste plant in the past year, partly on the back of higher energy prices. Though, of course, you'll know that that has also been a burden on the council's expenditure this year as well.
And the other asset, the newer asset, then is only on a 25-year lease. I take it comes to council after that, or 28-year, I think, isn't it? It comes to council after that.
Yes, that's correct, Convener.
Okay. The other one in relation on page 99 of take it that's property and plant. It seems to have made an adjustment. I'll maybe take that up at a later one. Page 113 mentions Dundee House, and I'm wondering why Dundee House remains mentioned on our accounts, given that we flogged it a long time ago.
So the cost in the accounts, Convener, represents the financial arrangement we've got in place, and which is a long-term agreement for the lease of Dundee House, which is a long-term agreement that we've entered into in 2019-20.
So we sold it for 22 million, but we've got an outstanding 22 million on it then.
That's correct, Convener.
So, smoking mirrors, how that worked out a good deal for with that. Maybe somebody could explain that in layman's terms to me. I know you guys operate with 3 cups. Where is the bit that I put into one of them, is that?
So I think, Convener, we provided a briefing on that previously, but perhaps that's something we can revisit at the seminar for members in September, if you wish.
Okay, right, okay. Well, that'll do me for questions in the meantime then. And I don't see any others, so is this report agreed? no doubt get the briefing on September. Thanks very much for that. Okay, we'll move on.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Item 8 then, before these other reports relevant to the remit of the Scrutiny Committee. Again, this is a report by Cathy Wiley, Chief Internal Auditor.
Make a comment on these, Cathy.
Yes, thank you. Just very briefly, this is a report that you've not seen before, but we felt it was important to bring this to you, and it's information that is publicly available that's been reported to Tayside Contracts and the Valuation Joint Board and the Roadbridge Joint Board that's relevant to the work of the committee. And it's really just for your information, and if there was anything there that you wanted to have more information about, we could arrange that going forward.
Okay, thanks for that. Don't see any questions in the meantime, so thanks for bringing the report forward anyway. It gives us food for thought. Thank you. Is this report agreed? Okay, we'll move on to the next report then, Willie.
Yeah, thank you. Item 9 then is the Dundee Integration Joint Board Internal Audit Report. Again, it's a report by Cathy Wiley, Chief Internal Auditor.
Yeah, you go again then, Cathy.
Thank you. You'll be pleased to know this is my last one, so here we go. So this is a report that was taken to the IJB by the IJB's internal auditors, but the information sharing arrangements means that we also bring this report to you once it's been to their board. So this review was, sorry, I've got the right page. This review was looking at their governance action plan and how that's being monitored and reported. It wasn't done as a sort of normal audit report. It was done more like a consultancy piece of work because they were doing a bit of a comparison around good practice and what was done elsewhere in the other IJBs that the FTF also do internal audit work for. So although they were able to give assurance that the items that had been shown in Pentana as closed around these actions, they were agreed as having been complete, they did make a recommendation, which is on page 80, around changing the way in which the reporting is done, so that rather than having one overarching governance action plan that covers all of the assurance sources that have action plans, that individual plans would be reported individually. And they've also made some recommendations about some of the information that might be included in those plans, just to give you a bit more context and ongoing cumulative information. So that it's really just there for your information to know that that's been taken to the IJB.
Okay. There's no comments. Councillor Lynn, I noticed your hand up earlier. Did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, just there's a tiny error in the government's action plan itself on page 2. Where it says a recommendation was then made as part of the 2028-29 annual internal audit report. I'm guessing that's 18-19. So
yeah, that probably is. I will feed that back to them and let them know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Certainly not getting nothing past you, Ken. Well done. Is this report agreed? Thank you. Okay, Willie.
Okay, thanks. Item 10 then is annual report and complaints, the report by the Chief Executive.
Andrew, you looking to lead me through this one?
Yes, thank you, conveners. So this is the annual report on complaints for 22-23. It follows the normal format. So we have several appendices. So the key data is in Appendix 1 in more detail, but we summarise the key information at para 5.1. So just for noting, the percentage complete at the 5-day target is down from last year, but when we look at it a bit further beyond the 5 days, what we're seeing is that over 93% of those complaints are completed off within 10 days. And it's similar for the 20-day target that has reduced, but we are seeing that there is a bit of variance in that, and we get it up to 92% when we move to 30 days. To look at the percentage complete, it's also worth looking at the average number of days to complete. So you can see that that hasn't dramatically increased. So we are trying to hit as many as we can within that 5-day and the 20-day. So the figures are staying fairly static for the average number of days complete. The report then goes on to look at the volume of transactions. So you can see, as an example, at Appendix 2, there is a significant volume of transactions that go through the council every day, week and year, and complaints is a very small proportion of that. We also look at how we try to improve from learning from the complaints, and we set that out in Appendix 3, and the satisfaction results are set out in Appendix 4. And then we close it off with some examples of compliments we received. So it's just to give that balance between complaints and compliments. Obviously, the performance is not where we would like it to be this year, so we have put in some measures that we're looking at just now. So we're now giving the exec directors and the service management teams monthly updates on how their performance is, and we're just looking to keep tracking that. And the council leadership teams monitoring it on a monthly basis as well. We've put more training in place. So there's been some turnover of staff, but we've done some refresher training. So we've set some of those improvements out at 5.2 and 5.3. And you can see that complaints has increased, and there is a bit of a debate about if you train more people, does your complaints go up? And obviously we use every complaint as a learning opportunity. So, you know, we take the complaints on board and we do try to learn from them. And I'm happy to take any questions. Obviously services are represented, so if there was maybe more detailed questions on a particular service, there will be other people who could come in and help with that.
Okay, Billy McPherson.
Thanks, Convener. A couple of questions. First of all, the first one's really to Andrea, the other one's probably more to the service department. The first one's in relation to what you said, and that was very helpful context in relation to targets. And I think it's to an extent reassuring that of those that are not meeting the 5-day target, there, you know, a greater number are being met by, you know, within 10 days, and ditto the 20 days in relation to 30. But at the end of the day, we'll have a target, and they're 5 and 20. And I was just really wondering how confident officers are that they can get back to nearly 77% the previous year and 64.5% the previous year for stage 2. How confident they are that we'll see during 23-24 an improvement of the target being met at both 5 and 20 days. I'll wait for you to answer before I go on to my completely unrelated question further into the report.
So I think, you know, the council leadership team is focused on trying to get that target back to where we were previously. So hence the additional information going out to the services, and it's also flagging up where there's, you know, we've been looking at where complaints are taking a bit longer. What we are seeing is there are some complex complaints. So when we drill it down and look at the areas that maybe they're taking a bit longer, it is a small number that are taking a bit longer, and they are predominantly around children's services and health and social care. Just because of the nature of them, they are a bit more complicated. They might require more people to be spoken to regarding the actual investigation of the complaint. And also what we are finding is that sometimes school holidays can have an impact for the, you know, any that are related to education. But senior officers are looking at this now on a more regular basis. And we're also another area that kind of flagged up was just that complaints are allocated, but maybe someone's on leave and maybe hasn't put an out of office on, so it's maybe not being picked up as quickly as it could. So just things like that we're trying to do that hopefully will start to make a difference, and we'll be keeping focused on this each month, just trying to get it back into where it was before, and if not even better.
That's very helpful. I would be quite concerned if there were a lot of instances of nothing being actioned simply because one officer's on leave, and, you know, obviously tackling that I think is important. But I'm very grateful for that feedback. My other questions about the information on page 87 on the sort of breakdown of where the complaints have come from, and although it juts about year on year, there's quite clearly across neighbourhood services quite a significant increase. If we took the base figures going back to 2017-18 and looked at 22-23, and I do accept it's gone up and down a bit, but the bottom line is 108 housing and construction in 17-18 to 199 in the last financial year. Ditto environment up from 145 now at 228. In fact, it was even higher. It was 263 in 21-22. And I was just really wondering from a neighbourhood service perspective if, and I'm aware of, there are challenges. Environment services have, well, in my opinion, have a bit of a resource issue, and that's not a criticism of the staff. That's just a month of resource in relation to budget availability. And I think we're all aware of the challenges facing housing and construction services in particular following the during and following the pandemic. But I'd be grateful for any input from neighbourhood services on how they hope to reduce the number of complaints going forward.
First, I don't know if I could come in there, perhaps, just to confirm to you that, yeah, we are on top of this, and Andrea has outlined some of the steps we're taking, just simple things like out of office, to make sure we've got that adequate cover going forward. We have had a number of vacancies recently which we've filled, which will certainly help going forward, particularly in the forestry, for example. We do cover a wide range of services, over 6 million bin collections, and I know you won't be any stranger to that fact. But we have taken a lot of measures recently that aim to improve that. I'm pleased to see that within environment services we have taken a drop, but you're quite right, we're not down to that 145 that we were in 17-18. But through a range of these measures and through discussion at the meeting that's chaired monthly by the Executive Director, we are looking at this closely. I just want to give you that assurance.
That's very helpful. And obviously, we had a useful discussion about the forestry side recently, and I'm very grateful that's been taken forward. I think that's very positive.
You looking to make comment as well, Louise?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. I think Tony had fortunately covered it for neighbourhood services, so I appreciate that. I think just quickly, specifically around housing and construction services, we did see complaint levels drop during that COVID period and that initial recovery period, and we've resumed to similar levels, albeit just above that prior to COVID. I think an obvious impact, and Bailey Macpherson, you touched on it, is in terms of the backlog of repairs. And we see that in that detailed analysis that our team do carry out. So as we continue to work through that backlog, we anticipate that those complaint levels will decrease. But just to give some reassurance, and I would note that another measure that we review on a monthly basis is our customer satisfaction in terms of repairs. And what we have seen is that increase, and this year we're now just below target at 89.78%. So we can see that there is improvement in terms of the satisfaction side of the repair service, and it's those complaints that we're seeing around the backlog that we're really bringing down.
Yeah, that's very helpful input. I'm grateful to both Louise and to Tony, so thanks very much.
Okay, Councillor Short.
Thank you. It's probably in response to a conversation that was happening earlier in the committee where Bailey Macpherson brought up about the library, and I can't remember what the expression was, but it was from previous where you could go and ask questions. I obviously have gone on to the board of Leadership and Culture, so I've been doing a wee bit of my homework because you don't know what you don't know. And I recently came across Meg Marr, who looks after the volunteers, and she was telling me that there's great signposting coming across from people from Tayside House into the libraries, and when they get to the library, she's got a cohort of volunteers. They actually are working with people with that digital inclusion and helping support people to do many of the things that we've been talking about. So I just wanted to find out if that was something that all of us in our role as elected members were aware of, and also to say that I'm just going to use this as a little bit of opportunity to say congratulations to one of our new Dundonians, Andrew, who won Volunteer of the Year in the Volunteer Awards last Friday. through, I think it was in Glasgow. So we've obviously got some really exciting people doing some really good things, and perhaps we should be more aware of it from the different parts of the council, so that we can also do that signposting as well.
From my point of view, Lynn, if you're looking for an answer of how much I know about some individuals that work for the council, that would be very little. I tend to go to senior officers, and I might raise complaints if I didn't get answers too quickly from them. But, you know, I think that, you know, if people are coming to me, they've tried round the houses, so I feel I should escalate it. But that's just my own way of working. Bailey Wright.
Yeah, I'm just interested to know the sort of complaints. Obviously, you can see what complaints there are, but what's the definition in officers' mind of a complaint? A complaint, or do you only take a formal complaint, or do you take, say, if a councillor is complaining on behalf of a constituent, is that logged as a complaint?
So we normally take them through the formal route, but that doesn't need to be via a forum. That could be by a telephone call. It could be in writing to, you know, anyone, or if an elected member was to flag it and say they think it was a complaint, we would put that through the system. Elected members' inquiries are treated probably in the same time frame, but slightly differently to complaints. So, you know, they sit aside alongside formal complaints. So customer services will try and assess when they get a telephone call, if they think the person's maybe been in touch before and hasn't got the answer, or as it still remains dissatisfied, they would put it into the complaint system. And that happens as well to senior officers across the council. So there's quite a lot of information comes straight to myself, because we look after the complaint system, and I would look at a case and say, I think that's a complaint, and put it in. Sometimes it's just an inquiry, so someone isn't actually saying it's a complaint, they're just saying, I don't know who to go to, but I want this inquiry dealt with, and we would then farm those out as inquiries. So there's a range of different ways that people can register their complaint. And if in doubt, people probably put it in as a complaint. And that's what we've been trying to make sure that people who deal with in schools and all frontline services are getting trained and retrained just on how to categorise issues, whether it is a complaint or an inquiry.
Yeah, what I was trying to find out is if the complaints that we as councillors make actually land up in the complaints procedure, or are the stats collected somewhere? Because if you're not putting these ones in to the annual report, there's an awful lot more complaints that's been missed out on.
So we've had some discussion previously with elected members about how they wanted to deal with complaints, and we got sort of mixed response about that, because people are coming to you through a slightly different route. So what we have been saying is, if you think it's a complaint, then you should put it into the system and put it to us, and we'll put it in as a complaint, and it will be registered as a complaint. So I'm happy to have another discussion again with elected members. We did a bit of a survey a couple of years ago just about things that you were getting in your mailbag, and whether there were complaints or inquiries. And a lot of the elected members were happy with how the elected members' inquiry process was working, because that worked kind of alongside and separate. But we're happy to revisit that. So I'm happy to take that off table and have further discussions with elected members on that.
Yeah, it would just be interesting, because you know, I'm curious about the number of complaints that I get where I'm saying I'm complaining on behalf of that person, And I know senior officers always deal with these complaints very seriously and take them seriously, and they're probably often something's done about it, so it makes it not a complaint anymore. But
I would say that if you've flagged it as a complaint, the likelihood is that would go through as a complaint, so it wouldn't go through just as an elected member inquiry. So officers are good at making that assessment, particularly senior officers. If you're dealing with senior officers, they'll be quite clear that that should be a complaint.
It's good to know that.
But we can look at that in a bit more. We can look at that in a bit more detail. Just to make sure that is the case.
Thank you.
Okay, no other questions on that report. Can that report be agreed? Okay, thank you for that. Willie, we'll move on.
Okay, thank you. Item 11 then is Local Government in Scotland Overview. Again, it's a report by Executive Director of Corporate Services.
You want to say something on this one, Robert?
Just briefly, Convener, this is just to bring to your attention the recent overview report Audit Scotland have published. I think it highlights the challenge that lies ahead of us in the coming period, and I would encourage members to reflect on it as they look at the financial outlook report that we considered on Monday night at Policy and Resources Committee, which will be coming back to a future report in terms of what's our strategy going forwards.
Is there any questions for Robert on this report? Agreed then, thank you. Okay, Willie, last item.
Okay, thank you. Item 12 then is Local Government Benchmarking Framework. This was remitted from the Policy and Resources Committee 15th of May to the Scrutiny Committee for further consideration.
Okay, obviously been to a Policy and Resources Committee where all 29 had the opportunity to ask questions. Any other questions to be asked of officers on this report? So you got a question in there?
Yeah, just very briefly, Convener, because I was reflecting. I did speak on, when this went to P&R, and I was just really wondering, and it's really going back to the whole issue of recycling, because obviously there's a significant job of work to get to recycling targets, which I think officers are very much on the case of. I'm just really wondering if the department could maybe give, and I'm not expecting a detailed reply today, but I was really wondering if there could maybe be an update to elected members, perhaps even done by email, just really on where I'm very conscious of the fact that there were to be initiatives around tackling non-recyclers, and whether that came down to the stage of actually door knocking to encourage recycling or lettering or however it's done, some of it maybe through social media. But I was just really wondering if we could maybe get something of an update on the initiatives that the department is taking. I'm just very, very conscious of the fact that not only are we well short of the total, the percentage that's expected of total household waste that is recycled, but also that these targets will obviously further increase in future years as well. So I was just really wondering if the department could give some consideration to that and give all elected members a little bit of an update on it.
Yeah. Is there someone able to take that forward? Was it Tony?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Thanks, Billy McPherson, for the question. I can absolutely arrange that update at an appropriate time. I say appropriate time because actually I have advised previous Policy and Resources and Neighbourhood Services Committees about the Circular Economy bill, and that has actually just been published in the last fortnight. And that tackles very much some of the issues that Billy McPherson has just alluded to in terms of how we're going to tackle and the measures that have been introduced at a government level to increase recycling targets, and it places some expectations on individual households and how that would be measured and indeed enforced in the future. But I also just wanted to take this opportunity to assure the Scrutiny Committee that we are working through 41 actions, that the data that you're looking at is the 20 to 21, which is a calendar year 20 to 21, the way SEPA look at those figures, that I am optimistic I'll be reporting to a future Scrutiny Committee this time next year about an increased figure for 21-22. And that we're tackling a whole range of measures around some of the stuff that Billy McPherson has alluded to in terms of social media. We have got improvements coming that way. We are currently working on a waste and recycling app which we hope to go live this side of the Christmas. And we're also looking at a whole range of other measures around reuse strategies and just simple things like improving signage. Once I've got more detail on particularly the circular economy bill, I'd be happy to provide a email briefing to members. Thanks,
that's very helpful. Yeah, I would just say, Mr. Boyle, that's very helpful indeed, and I appreciate your point about the new bill, and obviously an appropriate time for doing so, but more than happy with that response. Thank you.
Agreed with that as well. Councillor Shaw.
Couldn't let us go into the hall.
Couldn't let us go into the holidays without having a bit of sunshine. Despite scrutiny, and within this report, page 28, substantial 178, it talks about the living wage, and we've now breached that 100 businesses across the city that are headquartered in the city that actually pay the real living wage. Now, obviously, it's fighting against the tide of the cost of living crisis, but the fact that we've broken that ceiling is absolutely fabulous, and it's a council taking the leadership. I think it was in 2017 when I first got elected that we became real living waged local authority, but it's also working with our partners across the third sector and the private sector, and the fact that we have made substantial changes by taking that leadership and having people like Peter Allen and Anna Yule actually involved in that is really excellent, and shows that we can actually be a voice not just for Dundee but for Scotland. And I actually, around about this time last year, met Andy Burnham, and Andy Burnham is looking at the same sort of stuff down in his area of the world. So that leadership that we are shown in this city is happening right across these islands. So it's just a wee high as we go into the holidays, because I know, Kevin, you'll be looking for that at the end of your committee.
I mean, I know told you about how many holidays I've missed out on over the last year. Yeah, that's holidays are a badge. That's a swear word in this house. Okay, but thank you for that. And obviously that's a committee. And if you get time to do a holiday, or like me, here to go to the berries, see and enjoy it, make as much money as you can. See you later.
Yeah, I'll be nabbling, Kevin. Don't you worry.
You go for it.
See you later, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a nice break.
Thanks.
Thank you.